Salutations gaming enthusiasts, George My Nerd here. Since my channel began 5 years ago, I've been fascinated by the question, who is the most evil Mario villain? In my videos discussing the topic, I've looked at the Dark Star, forgot to mention Cursor, spoken about Count Bleck, and debated that Dementia doesn't even reach second place in the ranking, much to people's annoyance. But in both of those videos, I have reached the conclusion that the true evilest villains in the franchise are the Shroobs due to their cruel disregard for life, and despite their lack of access to any sort of ultimate genocidal MacGuffin. I'll talk a bit more about the Count, the Clown, and the Shroobs later on in the video, but for now, a new contender has entered the ring, and since I played through Mario and Luigi Brothership, I've been itching to make one of these videos about the one and lonely himself, Reclusa. This has nothing to do with the fact that old Shroob video is still by far the most successful and most viewed thing on my channel, or my desire to replicate that success. Nothing! Subscribe, please. Also, do you like my new profile picture? I'm really pleased with this drawing. He's such a cheerful and welcoming little guy. Rest in peace, old profile picture. Thank you for your years of service. I feel like this was implied by my spoiling the game in the title and thumbnail. I felt like 4 months was long enough to wait before doing that. But massive spoilers for Mario and Luigi Brothership ahead. You have been warned. To get a good impression for Reclusa's level of evil and how he compares to Mario's Rogues Gallery, I'm going to discuss Reclusa's actions, motives, and intended end goal should his desires be fulfilled to their most extreme degree. But before I delve in to talk about the world's biggest introvert, I need to address his biggest fan, Zokket. Even several months after thinking about it, I'm still not 100% clear on exactly what Zokket is. Essentially, he's a brainwashed, corrupted persona of Cosette. I don't know exactly how or why this transformation took place, and I'm not sure to what degree his personality is derived from her and what percentage is imposed by Reclusa, but Zokket is clearly an entity separate from both to some degree. This does make him a very interesting case to me because you love to see a conflicted villain who eventually feels extreme guilt for their actions. Zokket kinda gives me Count Bleck vibes. No, not just for his outfit. Both driven to some kind of evil insanity by a third party's actions, and both doing their best to help the heroes after snapping out of it. There is, of course, an important distinction here, being there was a degree of mind control in Cosette's case. But I see it as at least a bit more nuanced than Zokket is doing all of this because Reclusa told him to. The game implies that Reclusa was able to amplify Cosette's existing introvertism and enjoyment of solitude to the point she became obsessed with Reclusa and his lonely ideals. Cosette is this world's senior botanist, someone whose job it is to help keep the land and people of Concordia connected. Being antisocial is kinda the antithesis of her role in society, so I imagine she tries her best to keep these feelings hidden. Likely they were a point of shame for her even before Zokket. So when Reclusa takes advantage of this side of her to make her into his servant, hurt the people she spent her life helping, and destroy everything it was her duty to uphold, her attempt to deal with Reclusa on her own makes a lot of sense to me. I honestly relate to Cosette a lot myself. I'm very much an introvert too, but I often wish I didn't struggle so much to be social. I wish I was more skilled at making and maintaining friendships. So an introvert who inhabits a fictional world where social bonds are literally the planet's source of energy and life force, but actually often feels drained by that same force and feels replenished by its supposed evil opposite, hits strangely close to home for me. And I kinda wish this game had Cosette's part in her own turn to evil be more explicit. I like the idea of a villainous introvert, tired of not being understood, forcing people to prefer being alone so they don't feel so alien in their society. You can read Zokket this way to some extent, but most of this stuff is sadly only subtextual. Zokket is not a perfect extension of Reclusa's will. He has a very different passive-aggressive personality, letting people know he doesn't care about them by getting their names wrong, as opposed to Reclusa's abrasive and in-your-face yelling at you to leave him alone. I also believe some of Cosette's remaining willpower caused him to be a lot more chill and less violent than he could have been. He visits Shipshape Island several times, once while the bros are absent, but never attacks it. It's interesting to contrast that with Reclusa, who attacks immediately after being summoned. So we've established that Reclusa isn't 100% responsible for Cosette's actions as Zokket, but that doesn't take away from the fact she never would have become him if it weren't for Reclusa's influence. I don't know the exact percentage of Zokket's personality comes from his weird, crazy dad, and what percentage comes from his kinda depressed mum. I'm half joking when I call Zokket their child. He isn't really, but he is a third distinct persona that arose from the coming together of two people. But Reclusa is clearly the main one responsible for Zokket's existence and actions in the game. So we have our first crime to mention in Reclusa's list of actions! He telepathically intruded on Cosette's mind and twisted and altered her into his servant, and used him to wreak havoc on the world she had sworn to protect. Despite all the time I just spent making the case for Cosette being partly responsible for Zokket, I think we can still pin his various acts of terrorism and efforts to bring about the apocalypse on Reclusa himself. He made her do that stuff. Without the one and lonely, the worst thing I think Cosette would have done is eventually retire when Connie became capable enough and go live on her own. As such, I'm holding Reclusa mostly accountable for the destruction of the Unitree and the subsequent use of forced labor camps and biological warfare. But even if you subtract Zokket's exploits from the list, which you shouldn't, Reclusa still has a very impressive resume of evil deeds. Much like the Shroobs, he has also taken large quantities of the world's population captive by attaching them to some kind of plant and taking energy from them until they die. That's really specific, wow. Though his method is technically less cruel than that of the Shroobs, trapping people in personalized appealing fantasy worlds as opposed to the Shroobs just sucking them dry fully conscious until they die, but his method is a lot more sadistic. It isolates people very effectively to the point of making them not want to escape or even realize there's something that needs escaping. And what's more, Reclusa finds it funny to play with people's lives like this. I'm not even sure if he benefits from trapping them in this way. I think he might have only gone with this strategy instead of using doom blooms to bite people's heads off because this method is more entertaining to him. On some twisted level, I do think that he believes he's doing people a favor, seeing the solitude he's forcing upon the population as the best way of living. But he did laugh about how the people trapped in the flowers would starve to death in a few days' time, so I don't think he was being all that charitable. It is also mentioned several times in the game that Reclusa is not from Concordia and has already decimated the populations of several worlds before this one, suggesting he has the ability to travel between dimensions and has already committed omnicide several times over. I'd say actions-wise that puts his evil rating above Dementio and Black, who only briefly committed global genocides until the undo button was pressed shortly afterwards, and also above the Shroobs, who might have drained planets besides the one we see in the opening cutscene Dry 2, but that's not actually stated or directly implied by the game, even though I personally believe they have. Reclusa is the only Mario character to have actually committed genocides. All the other villains are very jealous. Motivations-wise, Reclusa is a fairly simple guy. He's here to mess with people, kill people, and have fun. Usually all at the same time. He travels from world to world, sowing solitude and feeding off the energy that creates.
It's how I sustain myself. It's not my fault that I love it.
He derives such a perverse, profound pleasure from inflicting suffering and death. To him, this whole end-of-the-world thing is the most fun he's ever had, and it's absolutely hilarious. For a while now, I've been thinking Reclusa's deal was kinda akin to Ultron in What If, or Null from Echoes of Wisdom, simply wanting to be the last life standing in a universe empty of life besides their own. But he's not a brooding edgelord like those guys. Like I said earlier, he has the ability to use more instantly lethal force if he wanted to. He does these things, and on such a large scale, largely because he just loves doing them, I think. In a way, he's kinda more of a Bill Cipher type, spreading death and suffering but not caring about the damage caused, seeing it all as a big party he's the MC of. The main difference between the triangle and the solo act is that Bill actually has friends. Let's again compare Reclusa to the Shroobs, since they're the ones I've been touting as the most evil for almost 5 years on this channel. Like the One and Lonely, the Shroobs also plan to kill off whole worlds, but the difference in their motivation and reason for doing so is that even though they're being excessively cruel and warlike, they are doing it to sustain their people alive and maintain their way of life. The slaughter at least had a purpose. Not a good reason for planetary genocide, but they were at least being productively evil, even if their methods were short-sighted and would eventually leave them with nothing. Reclusa is creating similar levels of devastation because he A, wants to be left alone, and B, thinks it's funny. These are not even remotely good enough reasons to do this stuff. Even if you frame his motivation as wanting to get the gloam energy so he can survive, this whole shtick is way too overboard and he enjoys it way too much to be worth pitying if you ask me. Lastly, in the Reclusa-focused part of the video, we have his end goals to talk about. What would he do if he was victorious in Mario and Luigi Brothership and allowed to continue his evil deeds to their furthest extent? This doesn't take much speculation because the game lays a lot of it out for us. He already made it clear that he plans plans to go to the Mushroom Kingdom and do the same stuff over there after finishing with Concordia. After that, it's logical to surmise that he'll keep traveling from world to world, ending life wherever it sprouts until there's nothing left. At which point he'll retreat into his egg for the last time and there won't be anyone left to reawaken him. This brings Reclusa's endgame close to, but not quite as evil as Bleck's plan, more on par with Dementio's slightly less evil goal of being the last remaining living thing. Though if he really needs to feed on the solitude of others to stay alive, then I suppose he'll starve himself to death too. So, after having a good long look at the bad short Reclusa, I conclude his actions, motivations, and intentions are greater than or on par with the other worst Mario villains. I think it's safe to say that he easily wins the actions category, being the only villain to actually successfully wipe out life on several worlds prior to the game's events. The Shroobs only confirmed to have done it to their own world, and the Count and the Clown only doing the same briefly before being undone. If the popular fan theory that Dementio wrote the Dark Prognosticus and put everything in place for it to happen and Bleck was only following that path is true, then everything Bleck did to destroy all worlds and temporarily murder thousands, if not billions, if not quadrillions of people is superseded by Dementio as actually being the one ultimately responsible. Unfortunately, the lore of Super Paper Mario is vague as heck and doesn't outright confirm or deny that he wrote the accursed book. I'm going to try my best to ignore fan theories with this video. If the games don't confirm it, I don't count it. In his attempt to play both sides and come out on top, Dementio ended up helping the heroes more than hurting them, and Bleck did all the work to bring out the big hole in the sky. Watch my Dementio video if you want more details. Bleck comes third in the actions category, and the Shroobs snag second with their cruelty and slaughter that doesn't get undone. Honestly, I think Cursor comes in fourth by merit of her mass murder of Sparks, causing of widespread suffering across the cosmos, and puppeteering innocent members of the Koopa Troop into laying down their lives for her cause, which is something Nastasia also did under Bleck's orders. So did 5th place most evil actions King Ollie. Not to mention Forful too. Wow, Bowser's minions cannot catch a break. Cursor is also one of the only Mario villains with a confirmed kill count, the only others being Reclusa, Ollie, and the Shroobs, at least to my knowledge. I'm mostly going to talk about the top 3 most evil for these various categories, but I wanted to tip my cap to the runners-up, the Space Goo Wizard and Racism McGee. In terms of Reclusa's intentions and end goal, I think he places ahead of the Shroobs, somewhat equal to Dementio, but behind Bleck. Unless the Shroobs invent some kind of reality warping technology, they're only a threat to their home universe. Dementio would have caused a much more total annihilation to reality than Reclusa would, but had intentions to have life go on in some form afterwards. I've had some people tell me in old comment sections that Dementio becoming de facto god of reality after the Void somehow makes him most evil, but we can't know exactly how cruel a king he would be. We just don't have enough information to assume. As long as reality goes on, as long as life goes on, there is always the potential for things to get better. At the end of the day, Dementio's end goal is rulership, and Count Bleck's plan was to obliterate everything in existence and then just leave it like that. So I don't really see how he can come anywhere but first place when considering evil end goals. Dementio has to come second in this category. Dimmy's willingness to destroy all worlds out of spite after being defeated, essentially having Bleck's goal as his plan B after being thwarted, honestly gives him the edge on Reclusa's less total annihilation of reality. Reclusa gets third in end goals, Shroobs get fourth. So that's 1 win and 1 third place for the solo act. But what about motivations? That's where everything gets quite tricky and difficult to rank things in a straightforward way. I've been thinking a lot about the motivations of these villains and how it affects the ranking since I made that Dementio video a few months ago. Things are about to get muddy and subjective. When it comes to villainous motivations, I think there's 3 main categories. The first one is doing evil acts for a perceived positive end goal. It's a category I think the Shroobs fit into, despite still obviously enjoying destruction of other life enough to make it a spectator sport. Most of their actions during Partners in Time were to support their lives and interests. To them, ravaging the mushroom world was worthwhile for what they could get from it. I also believe that usually Bowser's end goals to conquer other lands seem to be at least partially because he believes people will be happier under his rule. In Brothership, we see a lot of examples of his minions' admiration and loyalty to the King of the Koopas, and how the Concordians in Off and On Island similarly came to appreciate him for being a good leader. The second type of motivation for a villain's actions is apathy. These people do bad things to others because they don't care about or respect them. So they torture, they kill, they treat people like playthings. This is the category I'd say Reclusa and Dementio fall into. Though Dementio does see other people more as tools than toys. but I kinda think that attitude would change into a more Reclusa-like view if the world's ended and he became reality's de facto god. Then he'd probably create an audience to play with for eternity, pleaser of crowds and all that. The third motivation I want to talk about is simple hatred. Villains who hurt or kill because they despise someone or some people, believing their victims are deserving of the punishment they're dishing out. Count Bleck fits this description due to genuinely believing all of reality is worthy of the oblivion he's bringing to it. He sees existence itself as a cruel entity that took away the love of his life, and that nothing deserves to go on living as a result. CEO of racism, Ollie from the Origami King, shares a similar sort of motivation, hating all toads for the perceived slight against him by his creator. The first category seems like the least evil one, but that again depends on what level of delusional the villain in question is. Bowser is a bit wrong about his belief he's doing people a favour, and the Shroobs were extremely wrong about how justified their horrific actions were. Though I would say they partially overlap with the apathetic group as well, since they don't show any level of concern for their victims, seeing them as simply resources to be consumed. Those apathetic villains are tricky to pin down. They're the sort of psychopath group. And a lot of people throw the word psychopath around like that automatically makes someone the worst villain. Several commenters in my last two videos in this series use this justification as a sort of Dementio instantly wins this most evil competition no contest move, when it really isn't. On the one hand, you can hate a psychopath for not treating people with respect or hurting and manipulating them for enjoyment or gain, but on the other hand, they're a bit pitiable for not really having the capacity to care for people, or at least struggling to. That's a mental disorder. I'm inclined to say that the third category is generally the most evil sort of motivation, but it's highly dependent on the character and situation. Vigilantes, for instance, tend to fall into this group. I'm also inclined to say Bleck is the villain with the most evil motivation out of the big four, but the fact he behaves the way he does partly due to having a prolonged kind of mental breakdown, and his conflicted feelings about his mission when he discovers his girlfriend might be alive, makes me think twice about my previous insistence he's more evil than Dementio. Reclusa overlaps with the hatred category too. He is passionate about his disgust for togetherness, and that extends to a general hatred for all other people and a desire to see them all dead. I conclude that Reclusa nets first place in the motivations category. He has a callous disregard for life like Dementio and the Shroobs, and he has a hatred for people existing in general like Count Bleck, and laughs at the death and misery he causes, again like the Shroobs. It's all a big joke to him. He does this stuff because he wants to, for fun, not for any greater purpose like the rest of the candidates. It is incredibly difficult to decide where to place Super Paper Mario's apocalyptic duo on the motivations podium. How much do I take Bleck's mental breakdown and conflicted feelings into account? And what even are Dementio's motivations? I have very little idea about why he's doing any of this. I think he just prefers the idea of a clean slate and ruling a reality he created, rather than going to the effort of conquering all of existing reality. He literally might just be doing this because he's lazy. And that lack of any perceptible good reason for his actions kind of makes him seem more evil. It's cop-out time! I said this would be muddy and subjective. Bleck and Dementio can share third place because they're giving me a headache. But who gets second in motivations? Is it the Shroobs? Actually, no. They sadly find their way down to fourth place again, as this time I've decided their motivation of doing horrible things for the good of their lives and empire carries more weight. Elder Princess Shroob avenging her sister aside, I don't think they commit these atrocities with any hatred. They just believe they have the right to squeeze the planet dry for all it's worth. Though the Shroobs and the apocalyptic duo are honestly really close in this category. Second place for motivations actually goes to a wild card who I don't think has any chance of being considered for the title of most evil, but does very well in this one category specifically, King Ollie. His father was a little bit mean to him shortly after he was born, and he immediately decided to annihilate the entire Toad race and start a fascist empire. Racism is stupid. Racism doesn't make sense to normal people, and racism often stems from dumb reasons like this, where someone has a bad encounter and assumes everyone in that particular group is just as bad. Ollie eventually realizes how stupid he's been shortly before his death, but for most of the game he has such a determined, burning hatred for all Toads, and for such little reason. Oh, and he sees Origami as the master race. He is basically the Mario version of Hitler. So, we've spoken about actions, intentions, and motivations. But did you think we were done? Yes? Me too! I'm in inserting this bit into the script weeks after I thought I'd finished with it. If all I was doing was finding the most evil villain and then leaving it at that like the other two videos, then what I've already said would be enough. But no, I had to go and try ranking them in all these categories, and Count Bleck coming in second place felt really wrong. So now I'm forcing myself to go even more insane thinking about this question by covering a category I never really saw much merit considering before. It's time to talk about redeemability.
But only briefly.
This video has been in production for months and I am sick of it. You'd better like and subscribe, also help me.
Thankfully for my sanity, there's actually very few villains who feel like they fit the redeemable category well. These are the villains who feel remorse for their actions, getting bonus points for actually helping Mario save the day. And by bonus points, I actually mean less points. Since this is essentially the goodness category of my video where I'm evaluating how evil the Mario villains are, placing on this podium will actually net you minus the points you would normally get. Most of the villains I've been discussing today don't have to worry about losing points though, on account of showing no signs of wanting to align with good. The Shroobs are out, as is Reclusa, who actually said sorry for his actions only as a joke, though it was pretty funny. And although I have gone on in the past about how most of Dementio's plans actually make him look more good than evil, I've already factored that into his placings in the other categories, especially his actions, leading him to not even place on that podium. But Dementio shows no noticeable remorse for his actions. Note the aforementioned destroying all worlds out of spite. The good acts he performs are important to note, but are more of a byproduct of his attempt to play both sides than a sign that he aligns with good. So who does place on this heavenly podium? In first place, losing 4 whole evil points, we have Bluesky. He spent about half of the game second guessing his plan, and the last few minutes of it being a key player in saving reality. He could have done more good by at some point giving up willingly like Nastasia often requested, but he believes his hands are tied as the one who must try his best to carry out the prophecy of destruction, even though at some point in the game I think he hopes that the Light Prognosticus will win out. In second place, I'm finally going to give Bowser a podium placement, although he's definitely not happy about it. Bowser is self-professed evil. He'd for sure resent being put on a redeemability podium, but he has shown time and time again across the RPGs that he's not really a bad person. He cares about his son, he cares about Peach, he cares about his minions, and even about strangers he hopes to rule over someday. It's not uncommon for him to ally with Mario in order to stop someone worse than he is. Though he's far from being a saint, he often chooses to save lives rather than end them. Case in point, his heroic DDD-like moment at the end of Brothership when he risks getting stuck in another world just to make sure one Goomba doesn't get left behind. Bowser's a good egg at heart, so he earns second place and a negative score on my chart, amusingly. Then third place is empty because I couldn't really think of anyone else with any sort of redemption, and Ollie's lame last-minute change of heart deserves a fourth place. I honestly don't fully believe him. He spent the vast majority of his short existence being extremely bigoted, and for such a minor reason. I think it's possible that after being mortally wounded, he just wanted to be forgiven by his sister in his final moments. Also, I think it's funny to keep flattening him with the big podium in these drawings. I did consider putting Zokket in third, but I don't think being released from brainwashing counts as being redeemed, only rescued. It'd be different if Cosette chose to become Zokket and then chose to change back to the side of good. Similarly, I didn't put Cursor on this podium just because Rosalina went back to being good after she was separated from the cosmic horror. So, Reclusa has the highest kill count of all the Mario villains. He views everyone else as toys to be played with until they break, takes great pleasure in breaking them, and has the potential and desire to inflict a similar amount of death as Bleck and Dementio. I believe Reclusa is a worthy recipient of the title of most evil Mario villain. However, I no longer believe this question has a clear-cut answer. I think depending on what angle you look at these characters, and how much importance you think each category of evil has, you could reasonably conclude that any of these 4 are the most evil. First, Dementio. If you subscribe to the theory that he actually wrote the Dark Prognosticus, he's suddenly much more involved and less opportunistic than he at first seems. And if you think that Blumiere's mental breakdown into Bleck makes him not really responsible for his actions, paired with viewing his redemption as being all that's important to his ranking, that removes his closest comparison and closest rival, the Count, from running for the top spot. If you also value cunning over suffering, and ignore his pivotal role in saving reality, and assume that his perfect world after all worlds end will be really nasty, then Dimmy holds a solid chance at most evil. I still think that's a lot you need to overlook though. I have come around to believing that Blek isn't fully responsible for his evil actions, and he was more pushed into his decision to eradicate reality as opposed to Dementio's choosing it under a more sound, clear mind. And his redemption has to be worth something, at least when comparing him to all the other villains who have zero interest in turning to good. But it's important to remember that he only had the capacity to be redeemed because Timpani wasn't actually dead like he thought. Imagine for a moment an alternate version of events without Tippy. Blek would develop no feelings of regret or apprehension over his plan. When he's eventually defeated by the heroes and betrayed by Dementio, it'd go more like this. The Chaos Heart won't fade, as long as I continue to control it.
Yes, Dementio, do it. Destroy all worlds for Count Blek.
Now I will destroy all worlds, and create perfect new ones!
No! No, Dementio! Kill them all and then yourself! All must be brought to nothing! Nothing will remain! Give me my murder MacGuffin back!
Okay, old man, you need a timeout. And then reality would be doomed, and Dementio would win because Tippy and Blek wouldn't be able to use their love to restore the pure hearts. The Count's drive for the destruction of everything is unmatched, and the existential horror of his end goal is worse than anything any of the other villains wanted. Blek wasn't doing any of this for any kind of gain whatsoever, not for fun like Reclusa or to rule what comes after like Dementio. He wants everything to die because he hates it all. I don't think he is the most evil. I think Super Paper Mario makes it clear he has profound regret for his actions and should be pitied to some extent. But I really feel like he's done too much evil to be let off the hook. I do pity him. I have cried multiple times at his tragic story and sacrifice at the end of the game, but I pity Cosette more. The Shroobs. The Shroobs. The ones who set me off down this path. They haven't done the worst things, they don't have the worst plans, and they don't have the worst reasons to do what they do. How they have fallen from the evil graces. But they're still the meanest, nastiest guys around. If you're looking for torture and casual disregard for life and enjoyment as that life is taken, they're just the war criminals you need. Their stakes may be a technically lower and slower death toll than the rest, but for the killing they do, they're gonna inflict the most suffering. And if you disregard the Void destroying several dimensions in Super Paper Mario because the damage was ultimately undone, the Shroobs have a good shot at coming out ahead of the Count and the Clown, since they have murders that stick and carried them out in a far more cruel fashion. In the past, I've generally seen motivation as the least important of the evil factors, basing much more of my argument on the villain's actions and intentions. But this time I decided to give motivations more of a spotlight, and it changed a lot about how I see these characters compared to each other. Goes to show how subjective a topic this is, and how stupid it is to get mad at people for having a different opinion on it.
So don't be stupid.
Let's tally up the scores! The first drafts of this script had Blek come in a close second, but that felt wrong to me given the sympathy I've given him in this video, so I caved and added a redeemability category, landing him in third. Though he would drop even further in the ranking if you ignore the destruction the Void caused because he got undone. He did still murder loads of people. They just got unmurdered afterwards. And my old favourites, the Shroobs, have fallen from the top spot, tying with Dementio for second after I went to such lengths in the last video to say they're far beyond him. Though I believe their cruelty is second to none. I don't want to add a cruelty category, as it's not always applicable. This result is partially because I'm trying to give the characters quantifiable scores this time instead of just picking the winner based on vibes and opinions. But if I were to choose between them, I'd definitely give the Shroobs the advantage over Dementio. So there we have it. I hereby take the title of Most Evil Mario Villain from the Shroobs and bestow it on the one and lonely Reclusa. The end of an era. I still love those little purple guys though. Really hope they make a return in another game someday. But yeah, Reclusa is an excellent new villain who's been fun to talk about. He was a very fun character to have around in the game itself too. I kinda wish he was in it more, but I guess it's the mark of a great showman to always leave the audience wanting more, even in a 50-hour long game. That's the end of the video! I hope you enjoyed hearing a Mario nerd ramble about an antisocial computer screen for half an hour. Hopefully all the Dementio stands in the comments will be less cross than they were in the previous video in this series. And if you are unhappy with any of my rankings, rest assured that I'm not happy with this outcome either. I do wish that the Shroobs had beaten Dementio proper. And when nobody's happy, everyone will be.
Hello? Did you take the picture yet? Hello? Did everyone leave? I'm stuck underneath this thing. Could someone move it off of me? It's very heavy. Please. It's flattening my folds. I've swallowed about 5 handfuls of gravel. Get me out of here!